Some insults can be forgotten, and some insults linger forever. Not all wounds come from blows. Sometimes the deepest wounds are born from words spoken with a cold smile. In the business world, where every word counts, pride is often the most frequently exchanged currency. But what happens when someone underestimates you not because of your abilities, but because of the color of your skin? This is the story of how a single arrogant sentence destroys a multi-million-dollar contract and reveals who truly rules the boardroom. New York, the city that never sleeps, where millions of dreams collide every day. Amidst the roar of yellow taxis and the thump of men in Armani suits and leather shoes stands a 50-story glass tower. The Cole & Partners Consulting logo stands proudly at the entrance. On the 40th floor, the atmosphere is a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle of the street. The air in the main meeting room is cool, almost sterile, tinged with the aroma of black coffee and fresh paper. White fluorescent lights reflect off the long, gleaming mahogany table, making the room look like a performance stage. And it was on this stage that the fates of many were decided. In the chair to the left, a young man sat with an upright but nervous posture. Tavian Miles, 28, wore a navy suit he'd just picked up from the dry cleaners the night before. His hand rested on a simple black pen, a gift from his mother upon his graduation. Tavian wasn't the type of man who would immediately be noticed in the room. His dark skin often made him feel like an outsider at conference tables filled with white executives. But his piercing eyes and the way he stared at the laptop screen in front of him told him one thing: he wasn't there to simply fill a seat, but to prove his worth. He was born and raised in Baltimore, in a lower middle-class neighborhood. His father, a city bus driver, died when Tavian was in high school. His mother, a nurse who worked the night shift, put Tavian through school at great expense. From a young age, Tavian had heard phrases like, "People like us rarely make it in the big world," but every word of disdain served as fuel. He studied harder, won a full scholarship to an Ivy League university, and now, despite being a junior, he's managed to get into one of Manhattan's most prestigious consulting firms. But one thing hasn't changed: he still often has to prove his worth. Across the table, Ethan Cole, 32, sat casually. He was handsome with neat blonde hair, a light gray suit, and a striking Rolex watch. Ethan was the only son of Victoria Cole, CEO of Cole & Partners. He had only been a vice president for the past few years. Many considered the position a family heirloom, but Ethan was trying to prove that he had the skills too. Even so, Ethan had his weaknesses. He was still arrogant, often rushed, and sometimes looked down on those under his command. To him, Tavian was merely a brilliant analyst on paper, not someone who could lead a meeting of this magnitude. But beneath his demeanor, Ethan possessed something his mother lacked: a conscience. He was still easily moved by injustice, though often at a loss for how to react. At the head of the table sat Victoria Cole, 55, a commanding woman with neatly styled silver blonde hair. Her black suit was simple yet elegant, and her eyes were cool and authoritative. Victoria was one of the most influential women in the consulting world. She had built the firm from scratch with her late husband. Today, Cole & Partners is a major name on Wall Street. Victoria is known as a disciplined, uncompromising figure who always puts the company's interest first. To her employees, she's like an untouchable goddess. To her clients, she's a guarantee of success. However, beneath that surface, Victoria has a cold side. She doesn't care much about personal issues. For her, what matters are numbers, contracts, and reputation. As long as the profits come in, emotional matters can be put aside. The meeting room door opens. In walks Charles Davenport, in his 60s, the CEO of a large manufacturing company that has long been a client of Cole & Partners. He's slightly overweight, wears expensive suits, and wears a bright red tie. His smile is confident, almost arrogant. Charles is the typical man who feels the world is in his hands. He grew up wealthy, inherited the family business, and then expanded it with a tough leadership style. Many people respect him, not out of admiration, but out of fear. And one thing Charles is famous for, he never hides his attitude. If he belittles someone, he says it directly, without a filter. The meeting began with brief introductions. Ethan led the initial presentation, outlining the business strategy. Tavian sat quietly, taking notes, ready to speak if called upon. Then, Victoria introduced the team. Victoria. And this is Tavian Miles, one of our brightest young analysts. He's been instrumental in preparing the strategy. Charles turned to Tavian. His gaze was appraising, then his lips curled into a cold smile. Charles. So, this is your analyst? Interesting choice. I didn't know you were running some sort of diversity charity. As if a bolt of lightning struck, the room suddenly froze. The words rang clear, with no attempt to disguise them. Ethan turned to his mother with a shocked expression. Victoria remained calm, smiling faintly, as if the comment were just a passing breeze. Tavian himself felt the world stop for a moment. His heart was pounding. He had experienced this kind of thing many times outside the office, on the street, on campus, in restaurants, but he never imagined he would receive a racist insult right in the most prestigious boardroom in Manhattan, with a potential $20 million contract on the table. He lowered his head, holding his breath, suppressing his anger. The words cut deep into him, but he knew he couldn't explode. If he retaliated now, he wouldn't just lose his pride, he could lose his job. Finally, he replied quietly, Tavian. I'm here because I earned it, sir. Charles just chuckled, then continued the conversation as if Tavian was merely an insignificant shadow. The meeting proceeded, the presentation continued. But for Tavian, every word after that sounded blurry. His focus was shattered. Charles's words kept ringing in his head. Diversity charity. As if all his years of hard work had been reduced to a mere free pass because of his skin color. At the head of the table, Ethan glanced at Tavian occasionally. He could see his coworker holding back his anger. He himself was disgusted by Charles's comments, but he knew his mother would never reprimand such a major client. And sure enough, when the meeting ended, Victoria simply said, "Thank you for coming, Charles. We'll follow up with the details." It was as if nothing had happened. The New York sky that night was gray, covered in dense clouds that seemed to block the moonlight. Skyscrapers stood tall, their lights twinkling like man-made stars. From the 32nd floor of Wellington and Hale Consulting's office, it was deserted. Most of the employees had left 2 hours ago, leaving behind empty desks and dark monitors. But one light remained on, the lamp in the corner of the small room Tavian Miles occupied. He sat alone in a chair, his jacket off, his shirt sleeves rolled up. His eyes stared at the laptop screen, covered in graphs, numbers, and tables. Notebooks were scattered around him, some frantically scribbled, others neatly calculated. On the table, a cup of cold black coffee accompanied him. But beneath that focus, his heart still churned. Charles's insult from earlier that afternoon kept ringing in his ears. People like you should be grateful to even sit in this room. It wasn't just his words that hurt, but also everyone else's silence, including Victoria Hale, the company's CEO. The woman so respected by so many who claimed to stand for integrity. In fact, she chose to remain silent for the sake of $20 million. And that, for Tavian, hurt more than Charles's insult itself. Tavian wanted to close his laptop, stand up, and give up. He felt, why bother trying so hard to prove himself if, in the eyes of those above him, he was just a small, expendable pawn? But as he looked down, his eyes fell on a small photo on the table, a photo of himself with his mother, in front of their modest home in Brooklyn. His mother was smiling warmly, her hand on his shoulder. His mother's voice seemed to come back to life in his head. Don't let anyone decide your worth, Tavian. You've earned your place. You fought too hard to be here. Tavian took a deep breath, He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were gleaming again. If people doubted him, he would create something they couldn't ignore. His hands danced across the keyboard again. He flipped through Charles's financial reports, annual reports, international market data, and even the latest trade regulations. Hours passed. Finally, on his laptop screen, a pattern emerged. Charles's company was overly reliant on a single supplier in Southeast Asia. Initially, it was profitable, with low production costs and an efficient distribution chain. But Tavian read further. New trade regulations were coming into effect next year. Import taxes would increase, along with stricter environmental policies. If Charles didn't diversify his suppliers immediately, annual losses could reach over $20 million. Tavian froze in his chair. He realized this information wasn't just data. It was key. He quickly jotted down notes, created a risk projection model, and then outlined alternative strategies. 1. Diversify suppliers to Eastern Europe and South America. 2. Build strategic alliances with independent distributors. 3. Implement a new quality control system to meet environmental standards. Not only were these solutions possible, but they were also a golden opportunity for Charles to expand his market. The clock struck 2 a.m. A light rain began to fall, tapping on the windows. The office was silent, with only the sound of the air conditioner and the sound of the rain as companions. Tavian took off his glasses and rubbed his tired face. But beneath the weariness, a small ember was burning. He knew he had just discovered something that could change everything. But at the same time, he knew this was dangerous. If she went forward with this discovery, she would be directly challenging Charles, the client who had openly insulted her, the client Victoria had fought tooth and nail to protect. And if Victoria didn't like her move, she could lose her job. The next morning, the office was bustling again. People were milling about, busy with reports and phone calls. Tavian carried the files he had found and walked into the office of Ethan Hale, Victoria's son. Ethan was sitting behind a large wooden desk, his tie slightly loose. He looked up when Tavian entered. "You look like hell. Did you even sleep?" Tavian, smiling faintly, "Not much, but I think I found something you need to see." He handed him the files. Ethan opened them, read them, and then his face turned serious. This is huge. If you're right, Charles could lose everything." But he looked at Tavian, hesitant. "If we push this too hard, my mother will say we're risking the deal, and you know how she is." Tavian stared back, his eyes firm. "If we stay silent, we're not protecting him. We're letting him walk into disaster. And if he burns, we burn with him. Do we want to be the firm that watches a client fall because we didn't have the courage to speak up?" The room fell silent. Ethan bit his lip, clearly hesitant. Ethan was not his mother. Although he was the son of an heiress, his heart was much softer. He saw Tavian not only as a subordinate, but also as a hardworking colleague. But on the other hand, he grew up in the shadow of Victoria, a woman who always emphasized one thing: never lose a client. Ever. He felt caught in the middle. Choose the truth with Tavian, or choose safety with his mother. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in his luxurious apartment, gazing out the window at the city. Tavian's voice kept echoing in his head, and for the first time, he began to question his own mother. The day arrived, the final meeting with Charles. The large upstairs meeting room was filled with morning sunlight. The long, polished wooden table was neatly arranged, bottles of mineral water lined up, and the projector was on. Charles entered with a swagger, an expensive suit wrapped around his frame, a gold watch gleaming on his wrist. He sat in the main chair, flashing a thin, mocking smile at Tavian. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her gaze sharp, calm, and collected. Ethan sat beside her, his face tense. The presentation began. Victoria opened, and Ethan continued with the first slide. Everything was going smoothly. Profit figures, growth plans, marketing strategy. But when the crucial slide appeared, the section on new trade regulations, Ethan paused. His hand on the remote control trembled slightly. All eyes were on him. Victoria stared, confused. Charles leaned forward, impatient. Then Ethan sighed and looked at Tavian. Tavian, why don't you take the lead on this one? The meeting room seemed to freeze. Victoria immediately stiffened. Charles snorted, clearly displeased. Tavian stared back. His eyes steady. Then Tavian paused for a moment, then stood slowly. In a calm but confident voice, he began to present his findings. Slide after slide scrolled by. Risk graphs, loss projections, concrete solutions. Tavian's voice was steady, though his heart was pounding. He wasn't just speaking with data, he was speaking with conviction. And for the first time, Charles seemed at a loss for words. But as expected, Charles didn't remain silent. He leaned back and said sarcastically, I don't need a lecture from a kid. I've built my empire long before you knew how to hold a pen. Several people ducked their heads, afraid the situation would escalate. Tavian stared straight at Charles. With all due respect, sir, the market doesn't care how long you've been in business. It cares about how ready you are for the future. The room fell silent. People's breaths even seemed to hold. Ethan immediately chimed in, his voice firm. He's right, Charles. If you ignore this, the risk is on you, and we won't let our firm's reputation sink with you. Victoria stared at her son, her eyes wide, a mix of anger and astonishment. Charles flushed, but couldn't deny it. This was the turning point. The humiliated Tavian now stood in the center of the room, his voice the center. Ethan, once hesitant, now stood on his side. Victoria began to realize her position was threatened, and Charles, for the first time, was forced to swallow his pride. The silence hung in the room, like a black cloud holding back rain. Everyone waited for Charles's next words. The man gripped the table, his fingers tapping in a nervous rhythm, even as his face remained impassive. I've been running my business for 30 years. I don't need a boy, he emphasized the word, telling me how to run it. My ways work. They've always worked. Victoria quickly stepped in, trying to take control of the situation. Charles, let's not dismiss this too quickly. The market has shifted. We are here to protect your company. Charles looked at her, then at Ethan, then at Tavian. His gaze was sharp, full of mockery. Protect me or embarrass me? You let this junior stand here and lecture me like I'm some rookie? This is insulting. There was silence again. Ethan wanted to speak, but held back. Tavian stood his ground, holding back his seething anger. Finally, Charles stood. I'll handle my business my way. If you think you can scare me into spending more money on your fancy strategies, think again. This meeting is over. He grabbed his jacket and walked out. The conference door creaked loudly as it closed, leaving a lingering tension. The room felt empty after Charles left, even though everyone was still sitting in their seats. Victoria closed her laptop with a cold click. Her gaze turned to Tavian, full of fire. What the hell was that? You undermined me, Tavian. Do you realize what you've done? Tavian held his breath, then answered calmly, I presented the truth. If he refuses to see it, that's his decision. But at least we did our job. Ethan immediately chimed in, staring sternly at his mother. He's right, Mom. You taught me integrity matters. Are we really the kind of firm that hides the truth just to please a client? Victoria fell silent, her face hard. She was rarely contradicted by her own son. Victoria: "You're naive, Ethan. This world doesn't reward truth. It rewards power and money." Tavian stared at him straight in the eye. "Sometimes telling the truth is the most powerful thing you can do." A few days after that meeting, a strange atmosphere filled the office. Charles didn't return, and rumors spread that he had gone his own way. Victoria grew colder, immersed in her work, rarely looking at Tavian. Ethan tried to maintain a cordial relationship, but it was clear he was caught in the middle of a family and work storm. Tavian? He returned to his small desk, continuing his work as usual, but deep down he knew. He had thrown a stone into a calm lake. The ripples would soon spread. 3 months later, big news broke. Charles's company lost a major contract in Europe. New regulations were officially enacted, import costs soared, and distribution chains were disrupted. Investors panicked, and shares plummeted. Within weeks, the company's losses reached $20 million. The Wellington and Hale office was in an uproar. All the business media covered it, and financial magazine headlines blared, "Stubborn tycoon loses millions ignoring warnings." And in each article, there was a small note. Wellington and Hale had warned him, but Charles chose to ignore it. One afternoon, Tavian was called into the main room. There, Victoria sat behind her large desk. Her face was serious, but this time without her usual coldness. "Victoria, sit down, Tavian." Tavian sat, his body stiff. Victoria stared at him for a long time, then finally said, "Victoria, you were right. About everything. Charles, he ruined himself, and we've been praised for warning him. Our reputation actually grew stronger." Tavian just stared, waiting. Victoria, taking a breath, "I owe you an apology. I let my fear of losing a client blind me. I also let his behavior go unchecked when I should have stood up for my team." The voice sounded sincere, though heavy. "Tavian, I didn't do it to prove you wrong. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Victoria nodded slowly. For the first time, there was a glint of respect in her eyes. Meanwhile, Ethan grew closer to Tavian. They often had lunch together, discussed new projects, and shared jokes. Ethan learned a lot from Tavian, about courage, about standing up for what's right. One day, in a small bar in Brooklyn, Ethan confessed something. "You know, Tavian, you taught me something my mother never did, that leadership isn't just about keeping power, it's about protecting people." Tavian smiled. "Sometimes protecting people means telling them what they don't want to hear." They both chuckled, knowing the words hid old wounds. Even though Charles was devastated, Tavian never boasted about himself. He kept working, staying focused. However, everyone in the office began to view him differently. From a junior, often underestimated, he had now become a symbol of integrity and intelligence. Some new clients even requested Tavian's presence at their meetings. He no longer sat at a small table in the corner. He began to receive bigger projects, more responsibilities. And though he still had a long way to go, he knew he had opened a door that had been locked. That night, Tavian stood on the roof of his apartment building, gazing up at the city skyline. The night breeze was cool, and the building lights sparkled like a sea of stars. He recalled everything that had happened: Charles's insults, Victoria's silence, Ethan's dilemma, his own bravado in the boardroom. And now, Charles, who had once belittled him, had lost $20 million, while he himself had risen even higher. Tavian smiled a little. Not a smug smile, but a smile of relief. This isn't about revenge, he thought. It's about proving that no one, no matter how rich, no matter how powerful, can take away my worth. He looked up at the sky, as if speaking to his mother far away in Brooklyn. "I did it, Mom. I stood tall." And for the first time since that day, Tavion's heart was truly at ease.